Failures and mistakes happen to everyone, including console manufacturers. Sony stumbled with the PlayStation Vita, Microsoft with the Xbox One at launch, and Sega, after a series of failures, shifted to publishing games, having lost the console market battle to Nintendo. Yet even Nintendo had its share of missteps. Today, we'll talk about the story of one of Nintendo's most disastrous consoles, though without it, there would be no Nintendo Switch. And without this console, now among the top 3 best-selling gaming devices in history, there might not have been a resurgence in portable gaming with the Steam Deck, ROG Ally, and others. Of course, I'm talking about the Nintendo Wii U, a console that was ahead of its time in some ways, while lagging far behind its competitors in others. Now let's dive into how it plays today and whether it's still worth buying. Let's get started. As with the story of the PlayStation Vita, which I talked about not too long ago, so feel free to check that out too, we know that it's not always the bad consoles that fail. Sometimes, good devices fall victim to untalented marketers, managers, and other suits. That's exactly what happened with the PlayStation Vita, and it partly doomed the Nintendo Wii U as well. The console was outdated from the start, losing out in performance to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, despite costing the same. However, the exact same thing happened with its predecessor, the Wii, but somehow that didn't hold it back. Nintendo has always managed to stand out among its competitors, not by following them, but by forging its own path. After all, the samurai has no goal, a saying particularly relevant to this Japanese company. Many of their consoles, which are now considered iconic, have had a significant impact on the entire gaming market. Take the 3DS with its parallax effect, for instance, which allowed for 3D visuals without glasses, something that still amazes the uninitiated even today. Or its predecessor, the Wii, which absolutely exploded onto the market with its unique approach to gaming. It wasn't just about sitting back on the couch, but about actively participating in the action, moving your arms, and sometimes even moving around the room. Most importantly, it was all meant to be enjoyed with the family, as the console was marketed as a family-friendly device. Even people far removed from gaming culture could intuitively control the games. The controller, resembling a TV remote, fit perfectly in the hand, and the separate stick was easy to get used to. This is what won over the average consumer, with the console selling over 100 million units, making it one of the top 10 best-selling consoles in history. Now, parents could easily spend time with their kids doing something they enjoyed, and the kids could play active games without damaging their eyesight on a monitor or ruining their posture at a computer. There were plenty of excuses to buy it, including claims that it helped with socialization through co-op games. Just a simple, "Mom, buy it." However, this same family-friendly nature made it less appealing to more hardcore gamers, who preferred the Xbox 360 or PS3 for their superior graphics and more traditional controls. These consoles offered the full range of games, not just casual ones. To be fair, with the popularity of the Wii, some third-party publishers also came on board, but due to the unconventional controls and weaker hardware, their efforts didn't turn out so well. Even back then, Nintendo was releasing consoles that, while unique, were technically weaker than their competitors, focusing more on the experience than on graphics. Plus, the family-friendly focus didn't allow for the publication of overly violent games, which is why GTA wasn't released on Nintendo consoles until the recent re-release of the trilogy on the Switch. However, this wasn't the only issue. As mentioned before, the GamePad, or rather what served as one here, was another problem. The Wii Remote, though convenient for the majority of people, worked perfectly only with exclusives, especially when combined with various accessories, from steering wheels to some sort of gun with a machine gun attachment. It's similar to what the Japanese are doing now, only with cardboard instead of plastic for the Switch's Joy-Cons. And while this all sounds great, it wasn't enough for multi-platform games. There literally weren't enough buttons. That's why multi-platform games weren't selling well, particularly the ones that generate the bulk of the revenue on regular consoles, since companies take a commission from every game sold, something that's no secret, I think. It's not that Nintendo wasn't making good money, they clearly wanted more, as the target audience for their console could simply buy Wii Sports and its equivalents without spending more money on anything else. That's precisely why, with the release of the Wii U, the company tried to return to the multi-platform market. They created a more traditional gamepad. At least now it had 2 sticks, shoulder buttons, triggers, and more. However, the new console remained fully compatible with the company's previous system, supporting not only game discs, but also all the accessories, theoretically allowing for a seamless transition for Wii owners. But this also backfired. Remember when I said earlier that the console fell victim to marketing? Well, when it was presented, several critical mistakes were made right away. First, they only showed the gamepad, which led most people. Keep in mind that a large portion of Nintendo fans were not deeply immersed in the gaming industry, to think it was just another accessory for the Nintendo Wii, as the company didn't bother to show the actual console. Though even that might not have helped, since when they eventually did reveal the console, everyone still thought it was just rebranding, like the PS Slim or Pro, and not a new system. After all, the names were quite similar. As a result, things went wrong for the Wii U right from the start. Even the GamePad on which Nintendo had placed their bets ended up being a gimmick for the sake of a gimmick. It was large, weighing a hefty 600 grams, which was quite heavy at the time, and most importantly, the screen wasn't necessary in most games. Due to backward compatibility, it was hardly used without modifications from developers. In new releases, third-party publishers mostly tried to put a map or some kind of auxiliary menu on it, which wasn't very convenient either since the screen was resistive, meaning you had to press it firmly, and it supported only one touch at a time, which is why it came with a stylus. As a result, very few people actually used it. The internal game library at launch was quite modest. To give you an idea, not a single exclusive Zelda game was released for this console. Of course, Breath of the Wild was being developed for it, but as we know, it came out at the end of the generation and became a system seller for a different console by the same company, so even the fans didn't understand why they needed this console. Yes, the screen is cool, and it even allows you to play some games remotely just on the GamePad, but with distance limitations. You couldn't take it to the bathroom, as the connection would simply drop. And not all games supported this feature, but the main issue was that the battery lasted only 3-4 hours when it was new, and even less now. If Nintendo had at least included a docking station, something like play for 3 hours, take a break, and the GamePad will charge, it would have been fine, but no, it came with just a cable and with its own power adapter, so you couldn't use another one. There was also a premium version in black that did include a docking station, but it didn't really solve the issue. Essentially, this was a transitional version of the Switch with some of the features already visible here. It reminds me of the situation with the Steam Deck, where the company tested out ideas in previous projects, including the touchpads on the Steam controller, their custom interface, and so on. This ultimately led to amazing results. A review of the Steam Deck will back me up on that. So it turns out that the main feature of the GamePad wasn't its screen, which was barely used anywhere, but rather the remote control function, for which a separate button was dedicated, and that was actually really convenient. You could adjust the volume, control media, and more without having to leave the game. What this console also reminds me of is the PS Vita, for which the development of AAA titles was quickly abandoned, leaving everything to indie developers and fans. And to be fair, the fans ended up carrying the system better than Sony itself, but that's a separate story, which is also covered in a video on the channel. The difference here is that Nintendo didn't give up on the console and continued to release a few, though interesting projects each year, many of which eventually made their way to the Switch. As for third-party studios, after releasing a few titles and seeing little interest from gamers, they decided not to spend additional money on development and porting. As I mentioned before, the Wii U was much weaker than its competitors, and optimizing for weaker hardware required quite a bit of time. It's similar to porting games to the Switch, except in the Switch's case, it's justified by the large player base, whereas the Wii U quickly lost people's interest. Even the few ports that made it to the Wii U, like Assassin's Creed 3, Call of Duty World at War, along with a few other entries, NFS Hot Pursuit, and Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, were pretty much all there was in terms of big titles. Well, actually, there's one more, Watch Dogs 2, which shows how all the other games might have looked if they had been ported to this console. Studios mostly ported games from the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, which looked, to put it mildly, bad. Lots of blurriness, terrible draw distances, and an average of just 25 frames per second. It goes without saying that even console players who defended 30 FPS started to backpedal. Many fast-paced games were simply unpleasant to play. Sure, over time you get used to anything, but after seeing the gameplay of a game on YouTube, which was already a thing back then, or playing it on a friend's Xbox or PlayStation, you didn't really feel like going back to the Wii U. The only standouts were exclusives, but as I mentioned, they were released rarely and were mostly family-friendly, so while the games were interesting, they couldn't attract a large number of gamers. These are the main reasons for the failure. Nintendo tried to return to the multi-platform market, but with outdated hardware from the start. With the Wii, this worked simply because of its unique controls, which later inspired PlayStation 3 with its Move controllers and Xbox 360 with Kinect. However, the Wii U, aimed at a more seasoned and hardcore gamer, simply lost the competition. It's unfortunate that even Nintendo fans weren't too eager to buy the new console, since it didn't really offer anything new. Playing Wii games through backward compatibility, using the same motion controls, seemed odd when you already had the Wii. That's why all the major games for the console were released in the first year, and were just simple ports from the previous generation, and new titles simply weren't ported. Nintendo did release games occasionally, but even graphically, they were worse than on the Switch. This is especially noticeable with Zelda, which runs at 25 frames per second on the Wii U, with blurry graphics and poor draw distances. Meanwhile, the Switch, thanks to its screen size, smooths out those issues, and even in docked mode, the games look better. This clearly highlights the weak hardware of the Wii U, which contributed to its massive failure. It became a vicious cycle. Developers didn't port their games, and as a result, people didn't buy the console. Nintendo put too much emphasis on the GamePad, which seemingly ate up the entire budget, leaving not enough for proper hardware for the console itself. However, you can't say it was released in vain. Many of the features from this console can be seen in the Nintendo Switch, which, as a reminder, is also a hybrid console, both home and portable, something they tried to achieve with the Wii U. But this is exactly why the Wii U is no longer necessary. Almost all the games from the Wii U were ported to the Switch with better quality, and the rest are mostly Wii games through backward compatibility. The few remaining exclusives that haven't been ported aren't worth the price the console is going for on the secondhand market. In the end, Nintendo fell victim to an old saying, you can't chase two rabbits or sit on two chairs at once. The essence is the same. Among multi-platform games, it simply couldn't compete with more powerful alternatives. And in terms of its fan base, it couldn't offer something as innovative and exciting as the Wii, whose controls were even used in its successor. Still, the Wii U went down in history as a rather unusual console that continues to attract fans and collectors to this day. I hope Nintendo learned from this and won't repeat the same mistakes with the new console. After all, the Switch 2, unlike the original, now has competitors in the form of the Steam Deck, ROG Ally, and others. You can find reviews of those on the channel. By the way, feel free to check them out after this video. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next videos.